Thank you everyone for coming down tonight, and yeah, on such a nice warm summer's evening being here. Hopefully the air conditioning is doing you some favors, and if you guys need any refreshments, there's just like some water and some sodas courtesy of Hip Hop up on the bar over there. For those of you who don't know, you're in Netil, which is a creative workspace, and it's a part of a collection of creative workspaces, including Hackney Downs Studios and Cornerstone Studios down south, as well as a number of other ones across the UK. And these spaces are home to many different creatives across all aspects of the creative industries, two of which are here tonight. And yeah, we're home and host to people across design, fashion, photography, including many other industries as well. And we recently started doing these Four Corners events, which are all about bringing together people across the creative space, focusing on different kind of niches. We did music last month, and this month we are focusing on branding and design in the digital age. So today we're going to be really focusing specifically on the question of how is brand design and storytelling evolving in the digital age. And joined with me today, I have an amazing panel of some of the most interesting people across the design and brand space, who just come from an amazing background, all four of them. So I'm just going to quickly introduce them. First over here we have Ed Gillett, who is a member of OnRoad, a branding design and research agency. He's also a very acclaimed author of the book Party Lines, which is all about the music and rave culture scene in the UK and its commodification over the last several decades. And he's also been featured as a journalist in BBC, The Guardian, pretty much every one of the major publications across the UK. We also have Kesang Ball, who is the co-founder of Trippin, which is a travel platform, started out as a peer-to-peer Facebook group, just sharing kind of travel tips, and has grown into an international platform, which has features over 130 countries, I think, and now is also co-founder of the branding agency All Corners, which is a spin-off of Trippin. Then we have Kevin Cheung, who is a resident of Netil. He is a freelance producer and production manager. He's worked with many different clients, pretty much all of the big brands from fashion, motorsports, Nike, Burberry, Aston Martin, McLaren. I don't know, it was hard to find ones that you didn't work for. So bringing a really interesting freelance perspective to the conversation tonight. And then last but not least, we have Janneke Geerts, who brings a wealth of industry knowledge, having worked for agencies including Ogilvy, Accept and Proceed, and now is the business director for Porto Rocha, who have clients just amongst a few, which are Google DeepMind. Let me check my notes quickly. You've got loads and loads. So Nike, I mean, I think you guys have all worked with Nike, so lots of different people, across those spaces. So I wanted to now bring it to the question and the conversation that we're going to be having today. And before we sent out some requests for questions from the audience, and we had some really interesting stuff, so we'll try to touch on those throughout, but we'll also open up the floor for a bit of a Q&A at the end to try pick up on some questions from the audience. But the first thing I want to start out with is just talking about the topic of trend and world building. And I think you guys have a really interesting kind of range of perspectives around world building. And I want to look at the sub-question of, are brands building digital worlds to bring us closer together or just to keep us hooked? And I think I'd really like to start with, Ed, your perspective, because OnRoad Agency is really focused on research and culture. And I want to know from your perspective, what do you think about this?
Sure. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. When I first saw this question from you, Matt, my initial thought was it's a bit loaded and a bit potentially a bit bleak. I think my thinking is that basically I took the question of kind of digital world building quite literally and was thinking about kind of digital worlds and spaces that people have been part of, that have meant something to people, whether that's social media platforms, whether that's games. All the ones, to my mind at least, that have had something meaningful culturally about them have been ones that have been user-led rather than brand-led. I wouldn't necessarily claim this as a universal axiom, but to my mind, the more a brand gets involved in the building of a world, the less interesting it becomes. And I think that the parallel that sort of leapt to mind when I was thinking about this question was worlds like Minecraft or Roblox, or like, three-dimensional virtual spaces, which, whatever criticisms you can make of them, are made primarily by the people who use them. Their meaning and cultural relevance is generated by the people occupying those worlds. And then you compare that to an idea that I'm sure we've almost all completely forgotten about by now, which is the metaverse, which is a similar sort of world, but designed solely from a brand perspective. It's the difference between being invited to a house party that everyone wants to be at and turning up at a house party and the host is really weird and like the drinks will taste funny, and like it's the difference between a space that people actively want to be in and are contributing to making something special, and a space that they are being sort of corralled into. The thing that sort of comes to mind with that for me as well is the doctrine that I'm sure we're all familiar with from Cory Doctorow of enshittification. So the way that platforms inevitably create spaces, create worlds for their users, which then decay irrevocably. So the first stage is they build something that is genuinely useful for people, and then they end up containing people within that space, whether that's Google search, whether that's meta platforms, whether that's a radio station or a broadcast channel of whatever kind. The second stage is that audience then generates economic value that draws in commercial customers, primarily advertisers, whose interests then supersede those of the users that built the platform's value in the first place, making it less useful, whether that's Google search becoming terrible or Facebook becoming riddled with AI slop. And then the third stage is the brand kind of takes the value accumulated by both of those two user categories and retains it for itself. And I think when we think about world building from a brand perspective, it's really tricky for brands not to fall into that trap. I think the principle that we try and recommend to brands when we work with them is to remain as human as possible, to think about the spaces, the worlds, the platforms, the experiences you're building as things that real people would want to go to, that people other than your shareholders might be interested in attending. And obviously, that's an extremely difficult challenge, but I think that's the sort of underlying question beneath the thing that you're asking.
I think you've given a really interesting kind of answer there, and also one which really touches on some of the ways that bigger brands, tech platforms will approach the subject. And I'd really like to throw it over to Kesang, because with Trippin, you've created on Facebook originally and turned it into this kind of independent multinational platform, which is its own digital world. How have you done that, and what do you think makes that authentic and interesting and doesn't kind of go through the enshittification process that Ed mentions?
Hi, everyone. When we founded Trippin, I have two co-founders, and it was just because of a massive pain point we were all feeling. We love travel and we love culture. We wanted to tap into the cultural scenes across the world, but unless you had a friend or you were a DJ and you got like the promoter to like literally take you to the best club, you just didn't have any access. And it used to absolutely, I wanted to slit my wrists if I had to type in cool hipster bar in like New York or something, and just never get like the kind of experience I needed. But the thing is, like, that information, that knowledge existed. It existed with real people, and it existed in the minds of like local creatives, with people with the same kind of taste levels. And so way back on Facebook, we put all of our friends in a Facebook group, and it just became really active, and it grew and grew, and then it became a petri dish. And I think communities and online spaces are anywhere you can see conversation happening. That's where you can really understand pain points, behaviors, and actually create something that's driven by purpose and solving a need for people. And that was a big thing that has helped us grow now into this global platform where we work with everyone on that kind of provenance. I think the interesting thing about the internet and how much, I mean, I was born in 93, so I have literally been a guinea pig to every little bit of innovation that we've ever had. And with the internet, we were all promised like connection. And actually what we got was just a mirror to ourselves. We were promised like a portal into new spaces. And actually it was just, how do we take a magazine and just make it online? And I think what's really interesting now, and that kind of went wrong. Like, it was like the macro. And if you look at like the social media platforms you were mentioning, it's like there's too many people in one space for it to be a world. You can't even have it. And so what you're getting, I think right now, what's exciting, because my role is a bit more around the innovation side, And I work a lot in tech and the intersection of tech now with community, culture, and creativity. And a big thing around that is we're looking at protecting the human voice within it all. And with AI, it can be scary, but it's like almost like this, it's like the first innovation native to the internet, which means that we can rewrite systems and rethink things differently. And a really interesting part of that online space right now for world building is something that the Mozilla Foundation are doing. And you're getting really amazing small companies like Subvert, which is basically like the new Bandcamp, or you're getting companies like Sublime, which is kind of like a human curated inspiration feed, kind of similar to Tumblr, but just a bit more community powered, where they're really creating their own world, but they're doing it in co-creation with their communities. And so you're looking at for-profit business models that are also like are powered by a cooperative of like all like musicians and artists and people. And I think that's really cool because it allows you to create these more like mini verses, which are not meant for everyone. They're inclusive, but they're also exclusive to, do you have the same set of values as me? Do you think the same? Are we into the same kind of sensibilities? And I think when it comes to world building, having that intention and that purpose driven at the core of it will attract your tribe. And it's really about creating something for a community. I think on your point of brands, you've got KPIs, mate. You've got salespeople. You've got to hit those targets. They are invested in keeping you there. But it's like, how are they doing that? And is there a purpose around their brand? I think we're now living in a world where we can rewrite the systems. They call it the post-naive internet because we are literally not naive anymore to how things are working. We know that influencers get paid. We know cookies track us. We know if you have a free product and you use ChatGPT for free, you are the product because they're testing you and they're using all your behavior. And so like we're living in this world now where I think people are actively choosing the worlds they want to be part of. And I think that's really exciting when it comes to world building.
Thanks, Kesang. I think you touch on there the kind of, I guess, the duality between the commercial component and then the authenticity. And Janneke, with Porto Rocha's work on, Google, Twitch, Apple, Robinhood, all these really big platforms, many of them tech giants, focus on the kind of social media landscape. How do you see those brands kind of retaining that authenticity when they're going through this process of world building? And I'd love to also hear, Kevin, your perspective on that, on the more production side of it. But yeah, Jan, if you want to give your thoughts first.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I think when it comes to digital world building and kind of the noise that we're adding, I think we really have to think about where, what brand and what product they kind of represent and where ultimately they are adding value, based on the kind of service or product that they develop. So with Twitch, for instance, Twitch is one of the largest live streaming platforms there is. And we rebranded them a few years ago because they were just acquired by Amazon. But actually the audience that they were representing, they were really kind of not connecting with the brand anymore. So we were thinking about, how can we develop a brand that actually represents the spirit of the audience and, translating that into a visual system that, really can kind of live with them and breathe with them, and also focusing on the experience that they're having within Twitch itself. So Twitch is obviously a platform that a lot of people use, so centering the experience around the UI and, the kind of live streaming itself, rather than creating all of this noise that is much more about, the message Twitch has to send, for instance. So that's like an example of the work we did with Twitch. But then, we also collaborate with big cultural institutions, and we rebranded Kunsthalle Basel last year. And what was really interesting there is, first of all, they're a legacy institution. So we had to kind of create a brand that was representing the legacy, but they're also the most important contemporary museum in Switzerland. So we're set the task of building a brand for them, but also thinking about how this experience would translate into the digital sphere. Because the reality is, people are engaging with, whether it's a museum or a brand, like a product, we engage with it in the digital space as well. So we were kind of set the task to think about how can we bring this Kunsthalle Basel, brand and legacy and their kind of world of incredible contemporary artists into a digital space that feels, actually authentic and really centers the community and the artists. So we built this really beautiful website that is solely focused on the space itself, on the art itself. So I think it's more about, what value can this brand or this institution add, what feels authentic to them in terms of, adding the value. Where can that be done in the best way is more kind of the question. we think about at Porto Rocha a lot.
And I guess from OnRoad and All Corners, do you guys feel similar about that in terms of the way that you approach those relationships with clients? Just before we throw it to
I really resonate with what you're saying completely. And I think we actually, our mission at All Corners is to help you get out into the real world to experience it. So how can we help brands be additive to that and be additive to culture? And it's really about creating those experiences, but really encouraging people to actually have them and have connections between themselves. And I think that's really where our mission is based around.
Sorry, yeah, and in terms of OnRoad, the majority of the work we do is qualitative research. So we get into people's homes, into their lives, talk to them about the things that matter to them and the way that they experience the products in their lives and the brands that they interact with. And it's really difficult once you've had that experience with someone not to kind of see them as a more rounded person, right? Like I think community is a word that's come up a couple of times already, and it's possibly one of the most overused words in the English lexicon at the moment. It means a million different things to a million different people. It can mean everything from follow account to customer base to audience to a political collective, right? It's a really slippery, really amorphous word. And I think what community means to us in the work we do is about building relationships between brands, consumers, audiences, people, in ways that feel human, that feel non-transactional. I think a lot of this stuff, when we think about world building, it's about creating something that is more than just, okay, you give me your time, your attention, or your money, and I give you a thing. Like that dynamic, I think, is increasingly transparent to consumers. I think it's increasingly ineffective for brands. And yeah, I think, it's interesting that concept of enshittification arose at exactly the same time as world building in sort of 2022, 23. I think they are in dialogue with each other to a certain extent, that the way out of this kind of dead end of passive digital consumption, of everything feeling like very atomized, very, as Kesang said, sort of universal in these spaces that are too big to contain the human. Constructing a mechanism by which people can have these more human relationships that are not based in solely in these value exchanges, I think is part of the solution, and certainly part of the solution that we try to embed in the work that we do.
Yeah, can I build off that actually? We on the topic of like loneliness, for example, we're the most connected we've ever been, but we're so fucking lonely, and there's actually an epidemic problem with that. And so one of our big clients is Hinge. We've worked with them now for the 4th year, where we started off with a research and insight strategy, but where we're working with young people, going off that insight and understanding why they're so lonely. And then, like I was saying, with our brand's mission, it's to get people out into the real world and actually for you to have those genuine experiences. So from All Corners, we did an event at Public Records in New York, at the ICA in London, and then most recently in Marseille, where we brought together collectives and groups and communities that had repeat hobbyists, so you could go and join them. So young people could go and learn and meet new friends in an environment where there was no drinking. It was during the day, and you could just trial out new groups and interests. And what was really interesting was 90% of people across London and New York came on their own, which means that people are really starved of these moments, and actually they want to step into spaces which where the online can be translated into the physical, but in a really kind of way that allows them to foster connection. And I think that's a really great way, an example of working with brands and world building, because you're doing something with a purpose at the heart of it, but also you're actually allowing people to have friends. And honestly, that was these are the projects that we love to do, because and they work. We're in our 4th year.
I'm curious as well, just building on that point, thinking about community, the kind of shift that we're seeing as well is, we're all talking about it, but seeing it done really effectively is almost like we're trying to foster and nurture a community that already exists rather than trying to create a community. Because I feel like so many brands are trying to be this protagonist and create this culture, create this community, but actually what it's about listening, fostering, nurturing, and understanding how brand can be more facilitating towards building the words that we are ultimately looking for today.
I mean, a really great example that's a live project we're working on right now is Notting Hill Carnival. We've been official map providers with Notting Hill for 5 years, and that's because they really trust us, because we've done the work, we know what a cultural celebration that is, a Black British culture, and a celebration also against like institutionalized racism in the London Met. And so there's so much nuance that comes with a beautiful cultural moment like that, and how brands show up. They have to be additive, and they have to be doing things. Like, we're helping one brand right now be additive to Carnival, and it's like, you shouldn't just say you want to do something. You need to ask a community or a sound system what they need, because they're always underfunded, and then work with them to create something special around that. And I think that's when you get the best moments when it comes to working with brands right now.
I want to throw that point back. I mean, you throw it over to Ed quickly, because talking of Notting Hill Carnival, I think it raises a really interesting point about just the music industry generally. And Ed, obviously, you're very well researched on the subject, having authored a book on it. So I would really like to know your thoughts on generally the creative industries and its commodification, but I guess with the catalyst being the music industry.
Sure. I also have a thought on the loneliness epidemic. I don't know if we're going to come back to that later.
We'll come back to that for sure.
I will hold my spicy hot take on loneliness for later in the discussion. In terms of culture, I mean, I guess, yeah, so the dance floor is a world unto itself that's influenced by the world around it. Any alternative vision of a world that doesn't conform to outside capitalist primarily logic is going to be a source of attention and often of oppression. Like there's a long history with Notting Hill particularly. The police have been trying to get it moved off the streets since I think the early 1970s, which for an event that was founded in the late 1960s is quite some going. In the mid 70s they tried to move it to Stamford Bridge football stadium, which, given the reputation of Chelsea fans at the time, was a bold move on the police's part. Yeah, I mean, I think there's this permanent tension, right, between culture that exists outside of market-based logic, right? People run sales centres at Notting Hill not because they want to get rich, but because they love doing it, right? It's a form of social reproduction, right? Of like constructing things for love rather than money, doing things that enable kind of generational learning, cultural development, evolution, and shared kind of moments. It's very, very difficult to put a price tag on that, and attempts to do so like often run into trouble if they're not done carefully. I mean, Notting Hill obviously has had its own fair share of criticisms, well, not necessarily the carnival organisers themselves, but people trying to move into that space in what's been perceived as an overly mercantile way in the past. So yeah, it's really, really important that any intervention into those spaces from a brand perspective is done with that understanding at its heart. I think people who love culture, who love Notting Hill in particular, but all of the sort of forms of culture that radiate out from it, whether it's dance music, whether it's street parties of all kinds, they're very, very quick to smell a rat. I think for good reason, given those histories.
Thanks, Ed. And you've spoken, Kesang, Ed, Janneke, about the, I guess, kind of conceptual level of brands engaging with culture, but I'm really keen to hear from you, Kevin. Sorry, I've had you in the wings there. But I'm keen to hear from your perspective, being on the kind of production side of things, how those concepts are actually being translated into the content, into the communication, into the actual things that consumers and what people are seeing from the brand side.
Hi, everyone. So, in my opinion, the consistently great brand that I have worked with and I see putting great content out is Red Bull. You know, they've been around for decades. They've got the same model, and I think they've really mastered the thing, which is attention isn't the same as connection. They appeal to the average Joe. I've done shoots with them where they stuck a simulator driver into an F1 car and then seeing how they go around a track, and then that's basically, you know, you aspire to be like that. They sell this lifestyle, and they diverge digital world and the grassroots physical world so well. So when you look at Red Bull, they throw events for 20 beat makers making music, and then, you know, it's small grassroots stuff like that, from that to massive, you know, motocross events, and you know, their stunt when they throw people off the sky balloon. But that's where they, you know, they gelled digital world and the physical world so well. And yeah.
Yeah, no, I think Red Bull is a really interesting example of world building, but also, I guess, disconnect from the product itself to the brand. I used to work for Red Bull for 2.5 years back in Australia, and I got to see some of that firsthand. It's really interesting how they're very keen to throw big budgets at massive activations that have nothing to do with the energy drink, but then also they're very engaged at a very local level through whether that's beatboxing or breakdancing or, you know, just people doing niche sports or activities. And I think through that, they've really created this kind of cult following and a world that people see them so much beyond just being what is basically a soft drink. So I think it's an interesting example. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that before we jump onto the next topic.
Just that they've previously been incredibly active in music. I think Red Bull Music Academy is one of the single most important incubators for new music of the last 20 years globally. But I think it also shows up the tensions, right? Like the funding for RBMA got pulled by Red Bull head office after their CEO took a very public rightward turn. That influence then trickled down from the top, and this incredibly important platform, and it's published some of the greatest music journalism of the last 10 years, in my opinion, just suddenly folded. You know, there was like a month's notice, loads of people out of a job, loads of opportunities for creative exploration, both amongst artists, writers, thinkers and audiences of all kinds, just suddenly cut off because someone had looked at a line on a spreadsheet and decided that it didn't add up. So while it existed, it was a beautiful thing, but its ending, I think, is also a little bit of a cautionary tale about what happens if those relationships aren't managed like up as well as down. There's also, I think, a requirement, or I don't know, I would hope that there's ways to get buy-in from people who have enough leverage high up enough in brands to ensure that these things are sustained rather than kind of arbitrarily cut off.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because so much of those extreme sports rely on the Red Bull infrastructure. And so there needs to be, I actually don't have enough knowledge around like how embedded those infrastructures are in governments or in other areas where they can be supported if Red Bull just decide to say, nope, we don't want to do this anymore, which they have done. I mean, I remember Culture Clash, if anyone is old enough to have gone to that was amazing. But yeah, there were some memorable moments where I think actually Red Bull had such an amazing cultural compass on the UK music scene. And I think no brand has really ever been able to replace them.
Yeah, I think that segues really nicely onto the next topic. We've kind of rounded out this discussion around world building, and I want to jump over now to talk about culture. And Red Bull Music Academy, RBMA, is a very good example of a brand that was heavily involved in culture. But the question I'd like to ask is, do brands actually add to culture? Are they adding value to it, or are they detracting? And I'll throw over to Janneke.
I think our brand's adding to culture. I mean, it depends. I think when done meaningfully and, you know, they're trying to add value, then yes. Two kind of examples come to mind. For instance, if we're thinking about like brand activations, we worked on the Nike Run brand a few years ago. So we kind of tried to establish, a visual system that felt really representative of their legacy, but also contemporary, and that was really able to stretch across all the different brand activations that Nike ultimately organizes. So like some of the London Marathon, marketing that you've seen, that was born out of the system that we created. And I think, through setting a brand and a tone in such a sharp way, there's moments such as Nike After Dark. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it was an activation that they did in different countries. It was kind of traveling around, and the whole idea was around, it's not safe for a woman to run at night. So we're going to create a space where they are able to do so. So I think through that lens, Nike is very much, adding to culture and creating a space where people can have conversations that need to be had. I think on the flip side, there's, recently there was an activation done by Satisfy, which is a brand that I, on a surface level really love. And it was a running running kind of race that they organized in Arizona in extreme heat, but they kind of blended it with, into like an event that had music, punk music there, and there were kind of pretty extreme circumstances. And they captured a video of that and kind of put it online, but it felt so unnatural that they received so much backlash around it. And I do kind of come back to the point of integrity and authenticity. I think if it's not necessarily adding any value and it's very performative, I think we are in a day and an age where these types of things are really falling through the cracks because we're not really accepting the status quo anymore. So I think that's kind of like, that's probably my perspective on it. It needs to be grounded in like value and integrity for it to resonate with the community.
Okay, Kesang, do you have some thoughts on that?
I do. I've got a few. Yes. I mean, firstly, I guess the first is with Trippin. So Trippin is a travel culture platform, and it's based off helping you get to somewhere with local recommendations from an artist, a chef, like your favorite musician, but local to the area, a neighborhood. And that grew and grew. And actually, it was during the pandemic where travel stopped. And we were like, okay, it's actually morally incorrect for us as a brand to be encouraging travel. How about we speak to our community? And my old university, UCL, had reached out to me to do a project, and I said, well, it'd be really cool if we could collaborate on the future of travel research report. And we did that in collaboration with them, where we interviewed a massive sample size of our audience. Our audience is super diverse, it's intersectional, and it's also global. So as much as our main markets, the UK and the US, we have a lot of our audience in West Africa, in parts of East Asia, in Brazil. It's really everywhere we show up, we've managed to have a cultural impact there, which is really fucking cool. So as I interviewed all of these people, and it was just so obvious to me how travel had really been underplaying everyone that wasn't the majority of people in our audience. Like, some people would be really nervous to go to a country like in Europe because of racism, or they wouldn't. As a queer traveler, the queer travel market was only really set up for white men. It was white gay men, and so actually, if you're anything else or an intersection underneath that, then it becomes a bit of a minefield. And so we made sure then that all of our guides going forward would have sections on what the police were like, written by someone who was from a non-white community, what it's queer like going to those places, where you can go have a fun kiki, whereas like, what's the neighborhood like? How can we make sure that we're not stopping gentrification in those areas? And so like, really actually, we showed up for an industry that was so underserving, not only the travelers, but the locals as well, because like, you want to step correctly wherever you want to go. And so actually, I think that's very much, the importance of community and speaking. And, well, I've kind of forgotten where I started off with, but...
No, I think you make a really great point. And Trippin is such a great example of a
culture
brand.
Exactly. Brand showing up in culture.
Adding value through culture.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Ed, you obviously have, done a lot of journalistic work on the commodification of brands and their focus on taking over culture in a capitalistic way. What is your take on this?
Clearly there's a tension, right, between the objectives of brands, the KPIs you mentioned, the bottom line, and the interest of culture, which is very often, if not actively anti-commercial, then at least like commerce agnostic, right? The average profit margin for a grassroots UK music venue is 0.1%. So any independently owned music venue in the UK as like an industry is basically operating on a not-for-profit model. Like, they are an accounting error away from going bust. And that's, that is the lifeblood of UK music, right? That network of independently owned grassroots spaces. I think there are ways to bridge that tension, and I think that there are ways for brands to engage in culture in ways that is productive and supportive. I think that I sometimes get a little bit uncomfortable with the idea that brands create culture. I think that culture, by its very nature, exists at best in parallel to commercial concerns. Like, culture can be incredibly lucrative and culturally vital at the same time, but that commercial viability is not a prerequisite for culture. The two are not synonymous. When I think of kind of examples of like cultural brand interactions that have been really positive, at RBMA is a really good one. I think so. I'm a big fan of NTS Radio. They've had substantial investment from Universal. That has not in any way changed their product, their output, the community of listeners they serve. That to me feels like a commercial, cultural interaction that feels really synergistic. There are plenty of examples I could name where the reverse has been true, where brands have kind of charged into a cultural space and through looking at it through a commercial lens, have fundamentally altered what that culture means. So yeah, I guess it's not impossible for the two to work in harmony, but it has to be done really sensitively. And I think the key thing is like involving perspectives from people who exist within that culture or that community or that world, and giving them power. There's this tug of war that we always experience in our work, and that I see in the cultural commercial relationships that I write about as a journalist between like the people kind of on the floor, like literally and metaphorically in a club, in a space, and the people upstairs making the decisions, and that balance of power and asking and working with people who hold the power to give away some of it, even if it's only in a storytelling sense, I think is a really, really important part of the process, and one that I'm not sure every brand has quite worked out or got comfortable with yet.
Yeah, I think if you look at a platform like Instagram and the journey that it's gone on, it's kind of analogous for how brands have overtaken what was originally designed as just a social media platform in the sense of just people sharing photos of themselves, of their friends. And now it's this kind of cesspit of just advertising, basically, where you're being kind of just micromanaged down to every single click and second that you spend on the platform by every brand or person promoting themselves. And I think there's something kind of insidious about that, but also to a degree unavoidable. And I mean, Kevin, I'm interested from your side with a lot of the content that you're producing, like amazing brand campaigns, super creative, working with these big brands. What's your take on how brands might be able to or are adding value for people, society?
I have to go back to the Nike Run Club, sorry. Because I have a few friends that work on their events, and again, they create a community. Obviously, they get in via free shoes, and they give away free shoes, but then people stick around for the community. And yeah, Nike are fantastic at that. They really know their crowd. But you know, some brands aren't so much. I can name so many out of touch brands, to car brands, to even football brands. So, but for people who want to connect with their audience, you really need to stay true to yourself. And yeah, and then there's so many people driving that force. It's hard to all point in the same direction.
Yeah, it is. I agree. You just made me think about On Running, kind of building off the Nike conversation, because I think what On Running has done in the past few years is pretty remarkable. Their sales have grown so much, especially in the kind of past recent years, because you're seeing like this trend. I think, performance wear. Performance wear is not only for sports anymore. Like it's becoming, just like lifestyle, right? And we're all kind of like dabbling into it. And I think a brand like On Running, what they've done, I think really strategically, is the collaboration with someone like Zendaya and making that strategic decision to invest in this partnership, not just for one campaign, but like, a commitment in the long run to, her ultimately representing this entire different world, crossing culture, fashion, so many different kind of worlds coming together through that. And I think that is quite like a refreshing take on how, we can kind of invite new audiences into a space. And I think the reason why this was effective is because of the kind of longevity of their partnership and the way that she kind of like showed up, across the brand in so many different ways. So I thought that was a quite interesting little, yeah.
Yeah, OnRoading do have a really good targeting system for celebs, like FK Twigs.
Yeah, that was a sick campaign, actually.
Yeah. Shout out to my girlfriend, she made that.
Oh, shout out to Kevin's girlfriend.
My girlfriend, FK Twigs.
But yeah, it's just connecting.
That campaign was sick, by the way.
It was good. But yeah, again, it's just targeting and and like you said, bringing new people into the brand, and still targeting that core audience, because I mean FK Twigs is super fit.
Yeah, she's sick. Because it's all blending, these worlds of like sports, music, entertainment. Like I think brands are no longer competing anymore within the brands in their respective sector. It's like entertainment, and we're all kind of competing with museums, with brands, with communities. It's the lines are all kind of blurring. So I think that is kind of something that brands have to consider, and also kind of thinking about as they continue to grow their image.
Yeah, and I think brands are less going head to head with each other. Like Nike, I've seen Hoka, Solomon come up from nowhere on running, taking huge shares of their market share. So everyone's just looking at different ways to bring in new audiences, and it's less traditional in that sense.
They still definitely go head to head though, man. I mean, I have to take off my Nikes when I walk into Adidas.
Would you wear Adidas socks and Nike shoes?
Hell no.
I'm gonna do that.
I was just reminded by Kevin's mention of out of touch brands. I recalled a really good counterexample to the sort of very sophisticated thinking. I won't name the brand specifically, but I was interviewing a friend of mine who used to work at Boiler Room, and they were planning a show that was being sponsored by a car brand, and they were discussing the lineup and where it would take place. And then someone on the brand side was like, "Oh, and we'll have a car in front of the DJ, right? Just in the dance floor." And they were like, "Well, we've got to have a car on the dance floor because otherwise people won't know that we're marketing a car." And they're like, "No, that's not really how Boiler Room works. It's more about the DJ and the dancers." And it took an incredibly long time and became very, very close to being cancelled because these guys were fixated on the idea that they had to have the product in front of the DJ, visible to everyone, people like dancing around it. I don't know quite what the concept was, but that for me has always been a really good example of this sort of tension, and the counter example of like, you don't want to be the car on the dance floor, right? Like that's not the place that a brand wants to occupy.
DJ in a car sounds like a bit of a vibe, actually.
I mean, I think it might have been like, it probably would have gone viral, but I don't think in a good way.
At Red Bull, we used to have like the car that the top would open and you'd DJ out of the car. So there could have been a collaborative partnership there. But I think, the point being is that there's this real importance of nuance in branding. And I'm getting a kind of general consensus that there is potential for brands to add culture or to add value. But there's obviously an asterisk to that. And there's also a very deep downside. I'm interested to know from the audience, like, give me a show of hands if you think that brands can add culture. I reckon that's maybe less than half, which I think is a really interesting take compared to what your perspectives are. And I think I obviously don't know what everyone's professions or what your backgrounds are, but the difference between people who work in the branding space versus the regular person, the consumer, the fact that there's actually not the same perspective. What do you guys think of that? Why that's the case? And what would you say to the people in the audience who think that brands aren't adding to culture?
I think I've seen, a lot of my work is with grassroots communities, that people that like are setting up DJ clubs, youth clubs. They have library book clubs for Black women, or like they could be based around a sport, for example. But these people, and they're all like pushing forward art in a very whitewashed space. Like these are all people that actually rely on brands to support them in some kind of way, and the brands are generally quite additive to what they're doing, but they wouldn't be a lot of people from like more working class backgrounds of different socioeconomic places, so they're just not set up in the creative spaces where they want to do, where a lot of people that fortunately are able to have a big safety net are able to focus exactly on their like professions and drive their creative I guess like passions and projects and culture forward. Whereas a lot of my friends and a lot of people in these more grassroots spaces do rely on the branding on funding from brands to keep their passions going and to turn them into for-profit businesses. So I see both sides. I just think it's about where brands want to play. A lot of more like blue collar brands won't necessarily go down to the grassroots. They'll stay in the more mass market leagues, and that's probably where they're not as additive to culture in my eyes.
Kevin, you got the mic up first.
Yeah, I guess we have just been naming the stuff that we thought was good, but there's a lot of really bad stuff out there as well. For even my own work, once we put Dave, the rapper, on Aston Martin, sat on a roof, going across the factory, and then got so much hate from old white men, going, "You can't, you're destroying the brand. How dare you have that guy's feet on the roof?" So there's tone deaf marketing as well. I just want to say that I guess we've just been naming our favourites, but there is terrible stuff out there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a bad news story always resonates more than a good news one, right? Like if we were to think of like brand involvement relating to Stormzy, the first thing we'll think of is McDonald's, and that collapsing. We won't think of like Mercy University and its grants, or like Mercy Publishing and like its support for new writers, right? Just instinctively on a very human level, the things that go wrong sit with us for far longer than the things that go right. And I think on one level that's sort of justified, right? Like brands have a lot of power. They have a lot of like financial agency in this conversation. They should really be getting it right, ideally, far more often than they get it wrong. Like the flops should stand out because they should be so much rarer. And I guess they are instinctively more emotive when you see this time and energy kind of going to waste. I think the other thing is that a lot of the work that brands do that is often the most interesting and the most positive is the work that they are least reluctant to talk about openly. Like they will quietly like give money to really interesting projects but not want to shout about it, and then they'll like blow insane amounts of money on some kind of influencer celebrity-led campaign that often does far less for culture but fits like their idea of what a campaign should be, where actually if you flipped it and you put all of the money and the attention into the actually good stuff, I think people would, maybe it's naive or idealistic of me, but I genuinely believe that people would respond to that much more positively and in a much more sustainable long-term way as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for that response, and it's great to hear those kind of differing perspectives, but then also a bit of a response to what the audience has to say. And I think given that we're really focused on branding, design, world building in the digital age, I would say that we're only going to see more skepticism towards brands. Like, given the skepticism that's been shown by the showing of hands, I think that's going to only continue. And that brings us on to our last topic, which is actually around design. And in the digital age with AI now, we're really beginning to see that AI is kind of perfecting design. It's taking out that human element to a degree. And I'd love to know what you guys think about how are we going to retain the human element through AI in brand design. So I'll throw it over to you, Janneke, first, to understand a little bit more about what you think, what Porto Rocha are doing, and what you have to say about that.
Nice. Yeah, this is a fun question. I think at Porto Rocha, and kind of my view personally, is that we approach AI and these tools with critical optimism. So I think, obviously we need to be super critical about these tools and how we use them, but they also kind of open up this horizon of possibilities that we weren't really able to reach before. So the way that we have 4 different teams at Porto Rocha, and each team kind of, uses AI in a different capacity, whether it's strategy or it's design or it's the project management team. But just thinking about design specifically, it's almost like we are in a dance with AI. It's like it's the interaction and the kind of iterative side of it and the refinement process behind it that makes it successful. I really believe that the tools are only as good as the people using it. And recently we actually collaborated with Google DeepMind on a self-initiated project using Nano Banana Pro, which is kind of an image creation tool. And we just kind of set ourselves the task, let's like try and prototype a product, build a world around it. And honestly, like the result was pretty fun. We ended up designing a yo-yo, which is called Yo-Yo-Yo. You can find it on yoyoyo.ai. And it's this really fun product that we created this really poppy, iconic brand around. And through the kind of, the process, we learned so much about the kind of world that you can also create with these tools, talking about brand building. So for us, it's really exciting. But I will say, when we actually brought out this case study, there was so much, a lot of positive feedback, but also a little bit of criticism, as you would expect. People are scared of like losing their jobs, and I think all of those concerns are valid. But that was a project that maybe took us like maybe longer than our usual project would, because it's really the tool in combination with like our incredibly skilled team that made that output so incredibly good. So that's kind of like how we're currently exploring it, and thinking about perfecting design through just software. I see it being a collaboration between human and tools.
That project's amazing, and for those who haven't seen the Yo project that they did, like the deck that was put out by Google DeepMind and Nana Banana is crazy. Like, it's super polished. It looks insanely professional, and I guess, as you say, many people are going to be scared by that. And so I think, Kevin, from your perspective, being in the production space, what do you think about this? Is there this fear of the overlooming, the bogeyman of AI in your industry?
I think AI is coming to touch every corner of the creative industry. You can already see it creeping in. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but you can see from pre-production to bidding to concept, a lot of work has been handed over to AI already, which is also scary, and it's only going to pick up the pace, in my opinion. And I guess people will have to make a choice about what they want to see. Do you want to see something that's created by a computer, or do you want to see someone that had an artist behind it? So in a lot of the situations, before we shoot, we have the concept art, maybe a talent in it, and the product is just as good as the real picture. And a lot of the time I'm like, why would we just use that fake AI picture rather than recreating it exactly, but spending hundreds of £1,000s of doing it? But I guess that's the human factor of it, and there's imperfections in it, and then that's where the humanity sort of leaks in, and that's what you really want to keep hold of.
I guess we're going through the kind of transitional phase, though, of people still opting to actually go through the production. Do you think there's going to be a point at which people no longer go through the production, or do you think that the human involvement or human element of it is fundamental to people engaging with it, or do you think it's going to evolve in a way where people are involved but involved in a different way?
I mean, look at the highlights of the year, the Christmas Coca-Cola advert, completely AI. And I just think the power these tech companies have, and the sway and influence that they hold, people will start taking shortcuts, and to the fact where it'll get saturated and you wouldn't even know what's real and what's right. So I guess, sorry to sound all doom and gloom about it, but I think, it's maybe we'll all get AI fatigue, and then all these companies will stop, and they won't even try. So maybe you can hope.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And at the end of the day, it is a tool, and it's going to be, it's going to continue to advance. It's going to continue to be ingrained in our lives. Kesang, what's your take on this? Trippin is obviously a very kind of grounded platform in the day-to-day experiences that people are having from a travel perspective. But you guys are launching all corners. You're obviously on the AI intersection space with branding, with design. What do you take of this?
Right now, one area I can't really share too much about because it's in I guess a bit more conceptual stages, but we are working with AI in really interesting ways, and working with some of the big academic institutions like Oxford, King's and UCL, and with their academic departments, because an area that I find really interesting about culture is that, and culture in the AI space, is that culture is human and it's alive because humans exist and we make mistakes and we love things and we create things. And that's what culture is. And you only have to see that in London, culture moves like that. It's got a heartbeat and it's really fast. AI, and especially when it comes to culture discovery, those data sets are crap. Like, it's like timeout listicles, it's like your PRs, it's AI sludge, just recreating other things. So like, maybe your friend and your auntie down the road can use ChatGPT or an LMM to plan their trip to France. Or they can say, look, reference the face, reference NTS, reference days, like, well, this is what reference Trippin, this is what I'm into. But fundamentally, culture like is alive, and so things become outdated. Someone might work or like with a brand, and actually then they become disgraced because they're associating with, I don't know, genocide. The culture can have a resurgence, and it can become exciting again. And so there's no way to keep on top of that. unless you're looking at data sets which are alive. And so that's a lot of the stuff that I'm looking at right now, which is at preserving human knowledge and the provenance of it, which is really exciting. And a great creative study of this outside the commercial world is done by the Serpentine and Holly and Matt Hermes. And so they really looked at how they could accrue and document culture in a way that also almost gives you like a little notebook in a database. And I think that's really exciting because it allows culture to be attributed in an AI world. And then as we rethink the world within AI, I think it's exciting because we can rethink systems and we can rebuild them, because you can rebuild stuff really quickly. And so actually, I think as much as the pendulum is swinging one way, where we have these big companies kind of controlling it and taking over industries and doing all of that, the pendulum always swings the other way back. And that's history will tell you that in any area. And so I think you're getting a resurgence back to people that, again, we have to critique everything that we experience right now. So like if you can tap into a Substack or a area or a cultural institution where, you know, they've got a code of conduct and they align with your values and you don't have to critique everything you're given, you're going to start paying for that. And I think that's across the board in every single creative industry. I think the human touch is going to be so valuable, but only if it's really good. And these tools can help you and can enhance it, but hone in on your craft because it's going to be so valuable. Why want a computer to do it if you can do it? And I think it comes down to artistry. It comes down to human taste levels. Right now, our human taste levels are really monomass. Like we're literally living in echo chambers of echo chambers. All of our design feeds are the same. Like the only place you go and get that is real life experience and real life connection. And that's what creates beautiful art and beautiful culture. And as much as I think we are going to get adverts, you can spot it. And it's just like boring. It's not fun. I want to see the Red Bull guy jump off the fucking plane and do like all that shit. Like I want human stuff. And so I just think that really comes to it. And I think the last thing I'll say is it's about offloading cognitive tasks for you to do. And AI is amazing at that. Oh my God, it's so great. Like I will tell it and it's organized everything. I've optimized my life. But when it comes to me thinking about things and creating things, like that's where like it can't replace people in my team. And like you've just said, you had a great team but they are the product of your team, right? It's how you use these tools and it's innovation, and we just have to roll with it and be these guinea pigs.
So I'm going to be even more negative than Kesang. Janneke mentioned being critically optimistic about AI. I would define myself as non-judgmentally pessimistic on two grounds. One, economic.
We're here for the disagreements, for sure.
One economic, one cultural. The economic question. So I tend not to take my cultural cues from Goldman Sachs, but there is an analyst at Goldman Sachs in New York called Jim Cavello, who is like the voice in the wilderness on AI. And I have him right on this. And his logic is very, very simple. The world economy is investing trillions in AI, but has not yet named $1 trillion problem that AI is going to solve, like within the economy as a whole. Obviously, you will be able to like manage data more effectively, but for the big AI investors, all of those differences are going to get arbitraged away because everyone else will have access to that same tech, within minutes. So there is a fundamental economic question there. Chip manufacturers and companies building data centers are making bank. Everyone else is losing money hand over fist, and that is not sustainable. AI is, in Cavello's reading, and I think in mine personally, a bubble. And unless something substantial emerges in the next 18 months to give AI its killer app, I think there are going to be very fundamental shifts in how AI operates economically. The other statistic that takes this into an even scarier place, the single figure most correlated with revolution is youth unemployment levels above 20%, because then you have a critical mass of people who have nothing invested in the status quo, who have the time and energy to do something about it, and enough life after that moment for that sacrifice to be worth it. Youth unemployment rates in the UK are currently at 16%. They were 14% 2 years ago. So if we have an AI crash in the next 2 to 3 years, what that does to what society looks like, I think is fairly scary. I think that there is a general common consensus that AI is inevitable and that its acceptance is inevitable. I think there is a strong economic case for being skeptical about those assumptions. And then the second point is cultural, right? And there's that classic quote from Henry Ford about if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. I think that faster horse problem is the problem that AI has not solved. If you had AI in its current form in 1998 and you asked it to design a PC, it would not have given you the iMac. If you'd asked it to design a phone in 2022, it would not have looked like the Nothing One. And those are both, two exceptional pieces of product design that have shifted the conversation in their respective spheres. AI is based entirely on a pre-existing corpus of work and can only draw from that. Creativity and culture is formed by people stepping outside of that, drawing links between things, drawing inferences, imagining beyond it in ways that AI may eventually be able to do, but certainly currently is a long way from doing. And I think that creates a kind of cultural and creative ceiling. I think its ubiquity is also a cultural problem. What is culturally resonant most often are things that are unobtainable. And we do a lot of research work with Gen Z, and it's really interesting. What functions as a status symbol for them is shifting at pace. It's no longer like designer bags or like follow accounts, right? Because those things are accessible to everyone now. It's having the time and mental space to get really good at knitting or like tending to your allotment, things that cannot be like optimized. And I think there's I see over the next few years a shift in the conversation where we are now. I think we are in a transition phase. I think what we're transitioning to is still incredibly unclear, and I think the potential like rules for that or possibilities for that are far broader than I think we often allow ourselves to engage with.
Can I say one thing just to counteract one of your points? I also think it gives a lot of young people that haven't had capital or generational wealth the ability to build things. And like if you live in an industry and you've been like, well, I wish I could do this, or I got some investment, you can go and do it now. And if you're actually embedded into culture, you already have your community, and all you were missing was the money to fund that idea. You can go and do it, and I think that's really exciting. I think that's the flip side, is that like actually you've got agency to create, and like tech is creative at the same time. You're just building things, and I think that's you're using the same parts of your brain that you'd be to create a piece of art much of the time. And so I think also it's like for me, I had to reframe it a bunch of times, like speaking to people like in our community. Like for example, like if Trippin launches an AI product, which we're not, but like we'll have elements of AI woven into it. It's like to even speak about that, like, and make it like palpable. Like we just did a research and insights workshop in a really big record label. And the minute we put some options out of like, how would you like this product to solve your needs, or like whatever. And the minute the AI, chatbots, anything, there was so much like someone actually wanted to vomit. Like it looked like that. It was that emotional. And I think there's a lot to be said about that, because people do feel threatened and about their jobs, so they feel like they, like you said, it's pulling from a corpus of information, but like what does it understand the intersectionality and the pyramid of all of that? Like where's the cultural nuance, all of that? How is it extracting it? So and again, like how is it going to tell me what to do better than my own job? And so there are all of these feelings around, and I get them, and I just think that there is it is how you want to look through the window.
So to clarify, I'm not a 100% certified AI hater. Like I think it is it is an incredibly useful tool, and I think it will continue to be an incredibly useful tool. I think its economic and social implications have not been like fully mapped out, and I think there's an inbuilt desire to see it as a force for good that maybe overlooks the very visible, incredible potential, as I see it, for it to unleashed like really troubling things sociologically. But I also think you're absolutely right that the parallel that someone used that I think is really interesting is that AI is like the build out of American railways in the 1800s. So there was a huge amount of money invested in railways in the US in the early 1800s, and nobody really wanted to use them. There wasn't like a freight network that could make use of it. There was a huge investment. It became this huge bubble. It crashed. But then like 30, 40, 50 years later, it came back into use and became this incredibly important part of the American industrial system and network. And I suspect AI will be something like that. The uses we can conceive of for it now, the uses that we're being sold quite aggressively, I'm not sure necessarily stand up to scrutiny. But I do think that the groundwork that's being laid now will, like 2 rounds into the cycle come good again and be really interesting. And I think it's important for us to think maybe that far ahead with it.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. And for the purpose of this panel, being the AI hater resident adds a lot of value. So I think, you both talk about the negatives, but also the positives of it. And I think that's really the thing, right? Is that it can be an empowering tool, it can be an enabler, but simultaneously the corpus of information that you speak of, there's obviously so many problems around the representation, who's designing these platforms, how are they involved in the way that people think. And so I think back to your point, Janneke, you talked about the Google DeepMind project, the Yo project that Porto Rocha did. And you mentioned that it actually probably took you guys longer to do that project than if you had just done it without AI. In response to Ed and his kind of critique of some of your points, what do you think?
About that iterative process, or?
I think about the benefit of using AI as a tool and whether or not it's actually adding value for you guys.
I think it's adding value because we're expanding on skills and we're able to test things and focus on, like, for instance, the way that we're currently using it. We would use AI as a tool during like a conceptual stage to like explore different things and like prototype things. So you're kind of like outsourcing some of that stuff, but the actual kind of craft of design itself, we're not replacing. So it's more creating space for our team to focus in on, the kind of design process and the crafting of that itself and the higher kind of strategic thinking. So it's more like it's creating space for us, and it's also opening just like fun, explorative, processes where we can just go kind of like, you can go as crazy as you want with it in a way. But this is thinking and talking about AI through the lens of just design. I'm not here to give my point of view on AI as a whole in society. I think there's a lot to say for it. But
that would need its own panel for sure.
Yeah, I think as a tool for design and creation, I think it is really interesting and exciting. And honestly, like, it's not easy to create something. Like, if you're kind of thinking about Porto Rocha, we're designing like brands and identity for high caliber museums and kind of sports brands and tech companies. Like, I think in order to deliver the caliber of work that they're expecting, like, it is a very kind of interactive process between human and between tool. And we, like you were saying, you were talking about the kind of human touch, like, all brands want a human element represented in their identity today. I can tell you that. So I think we haven't really been in a position where a brand has come to us and said, hey, like, can you just create a new identity for us fully within AI? Like, that's not, even the AI companies are coming and they're like, we would like a new photography suite. Can you go and actually shoot this with real people? Because we want to bring that into our kind of identity as well. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Well, we've covered a number of different topics, from world building through to community and culture, and then lastly into design and AI. And I want to thank all four of you so much. So if I can please get a massive round of applause from the crowd. Thank you, Ed, Kesang, Kevin, and Janneke.